Good morning, folks. Thanks for coming along so promptly. My name's Rob Campbell from the Social Value Engine. Don't worry, we were not going to keep you waiting too long. We might just give it another 30 seconds or a minute or so. We're expecting quite a lot of folk along and they won't all be here first thing, but we've got quite a bunch of you. Good. Good. And just to let you know, as I think you are aware, we're going to record this meeting. We've quite a lot of people registered, and I'm sure not all of them will make it along. So I think there will be some interested in following up. So it's being recorded from now, and just over half a minute, and we're into it's up, coming up for 100. So I think get started. So thanks for coming along. As I say, my name's Rob Campbell. Welcome to you all. You can see me and our two co-presenters, Andrea and Jen. If you have any questions, please fire them into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on that. We'll aim to answer the questions at the end. But if anything comes up in terms of sort of understanding, I might politely interrupt the ladies and get them to clarify a point. But we'll have time at the end to run through the Q&A, and I'll sort of feed that in and manage that process. So, yep, can I hand over now and over to Andrea and Jen?
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you, Rab. Okay, so I think we'll start with just kind of introducing who we are. So I'm Andrea Turton, and I'm a local growth programme manager at East Riding of Yorkshire Council, and I sit within economic development and specifically within the regen and funding team. And just a little bit of background on me, just so that you know. So I've worked here at East Riding Council for too many years now, it seems, but I've been here 17 years. Gosh, actually saying that out loud is wow. Yeah, so 17 years I've been here at East Riding Council. So I initially started in the council working in community safety and working on our neighbourhood action teams, and then consequently after that started working in community partnerships within the economic development service, and then I stayed there until now. But my background itself is deeply rooted in community development. I was really sorry, somebody's cutting grass, would you believe, outside my window today of all days, and it's pouring of rain. I'm not sure what's happening there, so apologies for that. Yeah, so my background is deeply rooted in community development within the public sector and within the charity sector, and I've now probably been involved in social value since about 2012 now, so a fair amount of time. I'll let Jen now just introduce herself.
Thanks, Andrea. Yep. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Jefferson. I'm the Programme Funding Coordinator. I work in the local growth team within economic development, specialising in social value. I've worked for the authority just short of 2 years now, so compared to Andrea, I'm very much a newbie. My previous experience and background is working within the private sector within social housing. So I started with East Riding as a social value evaluation officer. So I was drawn to that role immediately because I was really surprised to see a role advertised specifically measuring social value. And as soon as I got into the role, they invested in me straight away, enrolling me in specific social value training through Social Value UK. And I'm now an accredited practitioner of social value. So I work predominantly with our voluntary and community groups, as well as our internal colleagues, helping them to measure the impact that their projects are having within their communities. So that's a bit of background on me and why I'm here. So should we go on to the next slide and,
yes, please.
and get started?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so I'm just going to do a little bit of recap, a bit of an overview of how we at East Riding are where we are, and for those of you, we did another webinar a month ago. So for those of you that attended that, then you'll know some of this information, but I think it's definitely relevant to just put you in the picture in terms of why we are where we are, and a little bit of an overview of the journey we've gone through. So back in 2012, we were involved, and I say it's the royal we here because I wasn't actually specifically involved in this project, but we were involved in a European regional development funded project, specifically an Interreg programme, and it was around volunteering as a way back into employment. And at the time, we were really keen on looking at the social impact of that programme. And we started working with and began our long relationship now with Rose Regeneration. And we began looking at a very early tool for measuring social value. And those of you that are on the call today that have looked at social value or looked at measuring social return on investment and have used some sort of spreadsheet, we designed at the time this really clunky spreadsheet, which was developed specifically for the programme, and that really was the start of our journey into social value. At the same time as this was going on, I was working in our community partnerships team, so we had area community partnerships across East Riding. And those of you that know East Riding, we're a very rural and coastal. It's very beautiful here in East Riding. If you've not been, I recommend you come and visit. But I was particularly working in these area community partnerships, and we were delivering projects particularly around community safety, health and well-being, some around road safety. Basically, what was important to those areas at the time, we were working with the police service, the fire service, our town and parish councils, NHS at the time to develop these very area-specific projects. We, at the time, didn't do a lot of measuring of the impact of these projects. And what happened was an overview and scrutiny review panel was formed to look at what the community partnerships were doing, looking at their impact and whether they were needed. And I probably was the only one at the time that started to look at social value and look at our very early tool that we developed through this volunteering programme, to start to measure some of the impact of those projects. Unfortunately, what happened was we wasn't able to demonstrate the impact of these projects, and those community partnerships were dissolved. It's stayed with us for many years now, that whole process, and now we're absolutely committed to looking at the impact that our projects and programs have now developed. And that's really what began the change and how we really got embedded into social value and making sure that that was working and that we had that embedded in all the projects and programs that we were delivering. We at the time were trying to work across the council to open conversation about social value with our senior managers. And as you can imagine, that was quite a mixed bag. Some people were really keen to enter conversation about social value and learn about it, and were keen to look to see how they could embed it. And then we had other people that were absolutely not interested, and to be honest, would only do it if they were absolutely forced to do it. I'm sure if there's other local authorities on the call today, which I know there are, that might be a similar picture to yourselves. So we started in this position where we had a real mixed bag of response. We continue to work with Rose Regeneration and develop our relationship and develop the early stages of the tool to what we now have, the social value engine, which is obviously now a very user-friendly online tool. We tested the early tool with projects across the council to see whether we could make that work. We've since developed some kind of handy resources, which Jen will later talk about. But it's also helped us kind of work with our members at the council. So we now regularly have social value reports that go to member-led meetings to inform and to support some decision making, which I'll also talk about a little bit today. So just to give you a little bit of a picture about the small team that we have, obviously you've met Jen this morning. We do have 2 other members of the team, Hannah, who does work full-time on social value work, and we also have another full-time member of staff, Emma. She only works a fraction of her time on social value, and then obviously myself, who manages the team. Social value is one of the areas of work that I lead on, but I also lead on community wealth activities and cost of living initiatives as well. So we're very lucky at East Riding. We have some really keen senior managers and directors here at East Riding who champion social value and really steer and lead the conversation with our senior members here at the council and externally as well. Thank you, Jem.
Okay.
So just to get a bit more into the nitty gritty then of how we do look at social value and how we've embedded social value. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of how that looks like in terms of grant management. So we use a system called FlexiGrant, which is owned by a company called Fluent. And this FlexiGrant is our grant management system that captures all the grants and manages that grant process for people applying to grants from small organisations and larger organisations across East Riding. So in order to streamline the process, what we have done is we've embedded social value outcomes into the grant process itself. So in the way in which we've done this is we have included the social value outcomes in the application form. So organisations applying for grants are able to identify what they think the social value outcomes will be achieved by the projects that they deliver. We also then embed the social value outcomes into the monitoring forms so that they can then report to us at the end of their project delivery what social value outcomes they have actually delivered. So this allows us, if we want to and we choose to, forecast the social value and then actually measure the social value once the project has been delivered. And routed through all our data collection is the very important direct data from our customers, beneficiaries and stakeholders so that we capture that true picture and impact of the work. And that's all captured through FlexiGrant itself, through the grant management process, which enables us to really streamline that process. So a couple of examples of grants that we embed social value into. So we have a small grant that's called the Do It for East Yorkshire Community Grant, locally here called DIFI. If you hear me talk about it, that's what it means. Now, the Do It for East Yorkshire Community Grant was funded through a reimagining market and coastal towns members budget uplift in June 2021. So where additional funding with a little bit more additional funding from our public health team as well to support that community grant. The grant was open to our voluntary and community groups, as well as town and parish councils across East Riding, and it was designed to encourage communities to come back together after COVID-19. So it was just after the pandemic, and it was really around giving the opportunity for groups and community organisations to come back together, focus on encouraging people to come out and restart activities, restart community events, festivals, luncheon clubs, and really get activities going again. So groups were able to apply for between £500 to £5,000. Actually, we raised the £500 to £1,500 later, because we quickly realised that actually administering £500 worth of grants kind of outweighed really the amount of money it took us. So we did learn to raise that up a little bit. So through that application process, like I described earlier, we asked them what social value outcomes they thought they were going to deliver through the application form. And then similarly, we asked them again in the monitoring data. Now, in terms of how we did that on the ground, we have a team of local growth coordinators who work with the projects on the ground. They were talking to them about social value, talking to them about how they could capture that data, working with them so that when the monitoring forms did come in with all the social value information, all the information was there, they understood what information they need to capture in order for us to make that calculation. So in September 2022, we carried out a midterm review report so that members could see the impact that the grant was having on communities across East Riding. And this then led to members giving us further funding for the grant. So they were very much able to see the impact that the grant was having, and they very quickly then awarded us more money. That actually, we're sort of in about our 4th or 5th round of money, being able to offer this out to community groups. So they now ask for the social value information because it helps them to really understand the impact that these grants are having. So we've done a little bit of change over the time. So initially, when we were measuring the social value, we were looking at all the combined projects together, which, I mean, you need to do that anyway to get that full calculation. But what we've now started to do, because we've got a little bit more resource with a new member of the team coming in, we are now particularly focusing on each of the projects that have been awarded through the grant and looking at the individual projects' social value. And this helps them understand the social impact that they're having. It helps them look at how they can demonstrate that impact to others, particularly maybe other funders, if that's important to them. So later on, Jen will show you some impact cards as examples of how we do that. So our cost of living grants, as part of the council's cost of living programme, we've embedded social value into grants like the East Riding Emergency Food and Assistant Grant, which we award to food banks across East Riding. And that's really around kind of essential food parcels and essential goods. And then we also have a white goods fund, and that supports families and individuals across East Riding in order to get essential white goods like freezers, cookers, fridges, etc. So the White Goods Fund is actually, the grant is administered by one of our voluntary anchor organisations. So we've worked with them in order to help them understand how to collect the social value data. They then collect that data for us, and we're able to do the social value analysis. And then latterly there, those of you in local authority will be familiar with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So we've also embedded social value into our UK Shared Prosperity Fund projects, awarded projects. And that's particularly focusing on some of our external organisations who've been awarded. So I don't know what other local authorities have done, but we've run some sort of initial workshops to introduce, you know, the concept of the grant and what it'll entail. We made sure that we were having conversations with potential applicants about social value and how we were going to ensure that we were measuring social value as part of this process. Obviously, that's not something that government has particularly asked for, but we have written that within our investment plan here at East Riding. So that means that we are absolutely invested in measuring the social value. So we started those conversations, and then Jen and the team have been having more focused conversations with applicants once they've been awarded, in order to kind of talk about their baseline data, help them capture their social value data as they go through the process of delivering their project. So I'll hand over to Jen, who's going to take us through some more information and show you some impact cards that we've designed.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So Andrea's obviously gone into that in quite a lot of depth. So I'll just go into more of the intricacies of how it kind of works on the ground. So when we look at the Do It for East Yorkshire Community Grant, as Andrea mentioned, we used to collectively evaluate the impact of all of the projects. And what we realised was that most projects were delivering very similar outcomes because of the remit of the funding, post-COVID, trying to get people out of their houses back into the high street. Obviously, people were wary about going out. There was also an emphasis on warm places, cost of living crisis, energy bills going up. We were hearing regularly that people in our community were choosing not to eat because they didn't want to put the cooker on. So we realised that a lot of the outcomes that were coming through were, reduced social isolation, the cost of loneliness, and as mentioned, the ones related to the warm place activities. So what we tried to do was make things a little bit easier for our applicants, and we pre-selected around 15 outcomes. So when they were applying for the grant, they could flick through and look at which outcomes they believed were achievable to hit and able to forecast. And what that did was allowed us to match them outcomes to one of the proxies within the engine. So when it came to measuring it, we could do it consistently, fairly, and also we felt that it was easier for the applicants because they knew at that early stage of application what it is that they should have been measuring, or what we thought would be achievable for them to measure. So now that we've got more capacity in the team, we will go out and visit the projects midway through, and we'll tie this in with our auditing visits as well. And at them visits, we'll just check with them. Are you comfortable with what it is that you're measuring? How are you measuring it? Do you need any help collecting any surveys, or just tweaking? Because organisations are already collecting their own data, or most of them are. So it's just a case of looking at what they're already collecting, just tweaking it slightly so that we can get our social value outcomes out of that as well. And then what that's enabled us to do is at the end of the project, they will then submit their final outcomes and their quantities that they've been able to measure over the period of the project. So we can evaluate each project individually, which enables us to provide an impact card for each individual project, which I'll go on to show you on the next slide. Because the social value engine does give you a report, but we find the impact cards are more concise. It just kind of gives you the highlights of how much social value is being created and how many recipients or how many beneficiaries were part of the project. So with the cost of living grants, we tackled this in a very similar way to DIFI. So a lot of these grants are administered by our partnership organisations, who were then obviously working with smaller groups. So we recommended that they spoke to their applicants at a really early stage, spoke through the project, helped identify what outcomes were going to be achieved, and by doing so then helped them to ensure that the monitoring was going through from the beginning of the project through to the end of the project, rather than getting to the end of the project and, you know, we haven't collected any data to evidence this outcome that we have achieved, but we can't prove it. What we then do is we do measure them as a collective at the end of the project, and we will provide that organisation with an impact card as well. Now, with the larger grants, so the Shared Prosperity Fund, for example, some of our projects that are funded through SPF are internally delivered and some of them are externally delivered. And we follow the same process, whether it's internal or external. So we work with either one of the growth coordinators or whoever's running the project externally to forecast what outcomes are going to be achieved. With the shared prosperity outcomes, obviously, it is there is an expectation from DLUC, so the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, to evidence their specific outcomes as well. So it's around, we're not wanting to add a lot more work onto these community groups. We want to look at what's already been collected so that we can just tweak them a little bit in order to get our social value data there. So it might just be that we might tweak a survey, just add a couple of extra social value questions into the surveys. Once we've forecasted what outcomes we hope we can achieve, we can make sure we've got that baseline data as well. So we need to know where we're starting from to show where we've come. And that could be in the form of a retrospective survey, because, you know, some of these are village halls, parish councils. They're not collecting that baseline data. They know there's a need in their community, but they haven't quite got that evidence to prove it. So that's helpful for us in terms of social value analysis, but also that's information that they need to provide to DLUC as well. So it kind of combines the two. And also, again, each of the projects that were funded through Shared Prosperity will receive an impact card at the end of the project. So I'm just going to show you an example of an impact card. So this is a project that was funded through our Diffie fund. So this combines all of our welcoming places. So I think there was around 40 odd projects that had received public health funding specifically to provide a warm space for individuals in the community, and usually a hot meal and some company. So as you'll see, it's just got an overview of what it was, the social return on investment. So for every pound invested, £8.64 of social value is being returned. It just tells you the total social value achieved and the total cost of delivery, along with the volunteer hours and how many people attended. So it's just a snapshot really of what the project has achieved. And then we also measure our impact against the Bristol Accord framework. So this is just a diagram to show which of the domains of the Bristol Accord we've hit. So there's 8 domains of the Bristol Accord. Most of our projects don't hit all of them, and that's absolutely fine. But this just gives a little snapshot of which domains of the Bristol Accord our projects have aligned against. So this impact card is one of our projects funded through the Shared Prosperity Fund. So again, similar theme, just got the real highlights of the project on the impact card. So it's snappy and people can look at what's been achieved. I know there's quite a lot of information on the screen. It's probably quite small for you, but we'll share these with you afterwards as well for you to have a look. And this is just the second part of that impact card, which shows which of the domains of the Bristol Accord has been aligned against. So that's the impact cards really. So over to Andrea for procurement and commissioning.
Okay, so just a little bit of insight into procurement and commissioning, although this is a kind of developing area for us at East Riding, but just to give you a little bit of an example here. So the Your Hub construction framework, the construction framework is to help public sector deliver quality construction projects, and that works right across Yorkshire and the Humber, and that supports businesses and economic regeneration. It's managed by officers from the 5 lead authorities across the Yorkshire and Humber, and it's made up of 3 kind of frameworks. So there's your build, which obviously for building projects, your civil frameworks for civil engineering, and your consult frameworks for consultancy, all related to construction. So the social value is included in all these frameworks, which includes kind of employment and skills, the supply chain engagement, economic regeneration, and particularly projects procured through the frameworks that deliver that kind of tangible social value outcomes. So within the framework itself, there's a community fund called You're for Good, which is what you're seeing here on the screen. And that's particularly supporting voluntary and community groups who can apply for grants of up to £10,000. They can do it in 2 ways. So they can actually apply for the funding, or sometimes contractors that are working in the area fund directly to local organisations. They sometimes donate cash, or sometimes they're donating goods, equipment, or benefits in kind. So there's kind of 2 ways in which they support our community groups. But what you can see here is this was done in 2017, 2018, and it's 32 projects that were awarded through this particular fund. So you can see for every £1 spent, there was £6.46 of social value that was created for this particular fund. Thanks, Jen.
Sorry, I was just mid-sneeze.
Oh, how inconvenient.
I know. So the next slide is around internal project management. So I just wanted to speak to you about how we work internally. So not grant management, not procurement, just how we embed social value with our internal teams. So we get a lot of people knocking on our social value door who want to measure their social value because they know that they should, and they want to, and they know that they are making a difference. But when we get into these conversations with people, they're not really sure exactly what it is that they actually do want to measure. So what we do with them is we really go back to basics. So we help work with them to develop a theory of change. I'll show you an example of the theory of change on the next slide. What the theory of change helps them to do is to articulate exactly what it is that they do want to measure. It makes them think about who their stakeholders are, so who are the beneficiaries, and it helps them identify what their predicted outcomes are going to be and what the longer term goals are. We then use that theory of change to enter that information into our social value planning workbook that we've created. This is just a really simple Excel workbook. It works for us, it might not work for others, and that's absolutely fine. But using the theory of change, we can pick out the outcomes that they've identified, and it helps us to match it to one of the outcomes and proxies within the engine. And we do that because a lot of the time we try and get people at the beginning of the project, so when they're forecasting rather than when they've completed a project, to make sure that all the data that we need to evaluate and to evidence our outcomes has been collected throughout the process. So I'll show you an example of our planning workbook as well. So we do the theory of change and complete the workbook before we even do any training at all on the engine. We just find it a little bit easier. We can manipulate the workbook a bit more. We can check, is there any double counting here? Have we missed anything? Just things like that. So another thing that we do here, this is quite a new thing that we've started, is we've created pilot groups within different directorates. And the key thing here is getting buy-in from the top, really. So the heads of service want their teams to use the social value engine and to measure their impact. So we've worked recently with the health and wellbeing team and the culture and customer services team, and we've worked with small groups of around 5 to 10 people, identifying projects for them to measure. So some of these were evaluations, because when it comes to health and wellbeing, and they have received funding from other places, they are already collecting quite a lot of data. So we're looking at either what data's already been collected, or if we're forecasting a project, what data are we going to need to evidence these outcomes. What we then do is do a couple with them, start a couple of outcomes, and then kind of send them away to do some homework and think about the other outcomes that they are forecasting that they're going to achieve. They can then match them to the proxies within the engine using the workbook, and then we'll come back together and have one training session on the engine, and then they can input all of their projects independently. Again, they'll all receive an impact card. At the end of this, we've done the first one for them as a kind of thank you for attending our pilot groups and being a bit of a guinea pig, but going forward, it'll just be a template that they can take away and complete their own impact cards if they want one. So what that's created is some social value champions dotted around the authority, and now when people come to us, we have that conversation with them first. So have you spoken to so-and-so, who's your social value champion, who, you know, have you completed your theory of change? And then it's not to say that we don't want to work with everybody. We do. We don't have the capacity to handhold to the extent that some people at the early stages do need. So this is just our way, really, of kind of putting the emphasis onto people to have a bit of ownership on doing that themselves. We also have created some e-learning as well, which I'll go into in more detail shortly, but that also helps just give people a really good overview of firstly what social value is and how they can start to measure it. So this is just an example of our theory of change. So we're happy to share this with you afterwards. It's just a simple diagram, really. It's simple, but it's effective. Most of the information from the theory of change people already have in their business cases, and we complete it from the bottom up. So what is the initial condition for change? Why is the project needed? That then takes us on to our interventions. So what actions are you going to take? The beneficiaries, so who are they? Who's going to have an impact because of your project? And then the outputs and results. So what are your outcomes? How are you going to measure them? What will the outcomes be for which beneficiaries? And then the longer term goals, which is self-explanatory. And from the theory of change, we then take this into our workbook. So the next slide I'm going to show you, I appreciate there's a lot of information on it. Again, don't worry about taking it all in. We will send these out later, but it's just an example of what our workbook is. It's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. So the first section here is our output description. So what exactly are you doing to achieve the outcome? And we then use that to match to our outcome proxy and unit that are already pre-built within the engine. And as I've mentioned before, it just helps our users to get everything kind of down on paper or on spreadsheet as it is, check that there's no double counting, check that you've included everything, you've identified all the outcomes for your stakeholders. There's a second tab at the bottom, which is a full list of all the proxies, so the 360 odd proxies that are within the engine. Some people like to just sit and have a cup of tea and look through, and that kind of helps to jog your memory as well, to think, actually, we do that, but we haven't included it, so we can then go back and insert that as one of our outcomes. And then the third tab on the spreadsheet is just an example of how to complete the project. So if we've spoken to someone but they've not actioned it straight away, then they might not quite remember. So it just jogs their memory. Yeah, so that's the workbook, that's the theory of change, and that's how we tackle social value within the authority. So I'll just hand back over to Andrea to talk about our new policy.
Okay, so so interestingly here at East Riding, we in all the time that we've been doing social value, actually haven't had a social value policy, but we are now right in the throes of developing the social value policy. So in November 2021, the Efficiency and Value for Money of Council Services, which was a member-led review panel, sort of formally recognised the importance of using social value to measure the impact of council spending. So, and they highlighted the need to embed social value best practice across the council and explicitly use the social value engine as a way of corporately doing this. So the policy itself, it states that council and officers should consider and where possible explicitly evaluate social value through strategic and service planning, as well as through evaluation and the commissioning life cycle. So what we've got at the moment is that the policy has been approved by our cabinet last month, actually. So in November 2023, the cabinet have now referred that policy and the accompanying report that we did to our full council for full adoption in January. It's 10th of January. It's a very exciting day for us. If and when we're not expecting it not to be, but I think the key for us is because we've been embedding social value for so long. When the social value policy went to cabinet in November, it was enthusiastically received, and members were well informed about social value, and were very complimentary about the work that we'd done. So that was really good. So we're not expecting it not to be approved at full council, but obviously it still needs to be fully adopted. So the policy will seek to achieve a number of different things for us here at East Riding. So it will seek to improve all our services and project delivery. It will build on our community wealth. It'll encourage our supplier diversity. It will promote that kind of greater environmental sustainability as well. And just a little bit about how we will implement the policy across the council. So what we've sort of intrinsically embedded is the 8 principles of social value, which has been laid out by Social Value UK. And obviously the social value engine has been accredited by Social Value UK. So it's really important that we embed those 8 principles of social value in all the kind of areas across the council. We'll explicitly use the social value engine in order to implement the policy. And as Jen explained earlier on, we will use our social value champions right across the council to enable us to kind of fully embed it in all the services across the council as well. And then lastly, what we have developed now is an e-learning package to help really make sure that people understand what social value is, but I will hand over to Jen, who will talk through our e-learning that we've developed.
Yeah, I'll just whiz through these. I can see there's lots of questions in the chat that need to be answered.
Oh, right.
So I'll just have a couple of minutes talking through the e-learning. So 3 learning objectives. Well, actually, sorry, before I go into that, there's 2 modules that we've created. The first module is what is social value? Where does it come from? And relevant legislation, and then how they can start to measure their social value within the work that they do. And then module 2 is specifically around what the social value engine is and how to use the social value engine. So there's 3 learning objectives. So this is module 1, what social value is, why it's important to you in your organisation. Like I've said, the second section is around the legislation and the policy, and then thinking about how to measure it in your own practices. So this is just a snippet of Module 1. So the things that we've included, so it talks through the learning objectives. It explains what social return on investment is and the principles. You can see actually I've cut one of the principles off there, Principle 8, so sorry about that. It goes into the legislation and policy. So there's 7 pieces of legislation on there. It talks through various white papers, obviously the Social Value Act, PPNs 0620 and 0121, talks about the Treasury Green and Magenta books, and a little bit about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales and the Procurement Reform Act in Scotland, just so people understand what's going on in the wider social value landscape. It's not just East Riding that are on board with social value, it is becoming more increasingly important legislatively, and just making people aware of that. Also on the e-learning, there's a walkthrough video made by myself, which shows people how to complete a theory of change and the workbook. And then at the end of the e-learning for module 1, it invites you on to module 2. So now that you've completed your theory of change, now that you've completed your workbook, let's get it into the engine and get your calculation. And that will hopefully help the understanding before people come to us. We're always here to assist. Obviously, social value is fairly complicated, and we don't expect people to kind of go rogue and go off on their own, but it just helps give the background of what's going on before they come to us. So next steps, Andrea.
Okay, yeah, so just lastly then, just our next steps for us really, in brief really. So obviously we're sort of awaiting the approval of the social value policy, and then we will very quickly move into implementation of the social value policy across the council, and that obviously includes the e-learning. I just quickly saw somebody ask a question about e-learning and it being able to be accessed externally, so there is an answer to that. So if people have signed up for licenses of the social value engine, we're just working at the minute to make this e-learning available to them if they're a license holder of the engine, just so that you know, because I could see quickly there was a question on that. We're going to be doing a lot more work around our commissioning and procurement area. And we are very much embedded into developing our community wealth initiatives. I'm currently working on initiatives at the moment with our adult social care team, where we're developing a scheme in order to provide residents who need care in their own home. And as we're a very rural area, it's really difficult to get carers to certain parts of the county. So we're looking at this community wealth programme where we're developing micro providers, and we're also looking at developing a sort of good neighbours volunteering scheme as well. So the community wealth initiatives really sits really well with social values. So we've got a whole raft of thinking and developing to do beyond the initiative that I've just talked about. So I probably want to leave it there so that we've got a little bit of time for questions, Rab, if that's okay, rather than keep going. Or you're on mute, Rab.
Thanks, Jess. There's quite a few questions, and I've got quite a few emails coming in as well. So I'll maybe just guide you in terms of, I think some of these are worth a chat, and some of them we could maybe just skip over. What I would say is we will come back and answer all the questions and email it out to everyone. So we'll have a think about it, but we'll do what we can in terms of answering the questions now. So given we asked people to put it in the Q&A, but most people have put it in the chat, we'll start with the Q&A questions. And Stephen, I think it was first, Stephen McGarry was asking about SV in the SPF projects and other grants. How are social value engine outcomes and related proxies map to agreed SPF targets or outcomes? Okay. And do the groups have to subscribe to see more, or
That's
is that completed
okay.
by East Riding and Yorkshire Council?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, we've done a bit of a mapping exercise to kind of match all the interventions, outputs, and outcomes that are already part of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So we've already done that kind of pre-work, and then as we've said today in the webinar, we work very closely then with these projects to help them identify their outcomes. We help them kind of work on the data that they need to collect, and we're not expecting them to then go on and use the engine and we do that bit for them. So we gather all the data and then we enter all that information into the engine ourselves. So yeah, we wouldn't. Gosh, that would be quite complicated. But what we have found though with other larger programs that we've delivered is that actually some of the organisations across our county are then keen to actually have direct access to the engine, because then they've understood the process, they understood how it benefits them as an organisation. So some of them then have gone on to want to have access of their own to the engine later on. But yes,
that's brilliant. And again, we've got a sort of commercial structure to help councils do that if you want to share licenses with your sort of community or supply chain. Now this one comes from Amy, and it is in the Q&A, so but I know Amy's coming from a procurement background. I know that's an area you're working on, Andrea.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, one issue we sometimes have is ensuring suppliers deliver the social value KPIs offered in the tender. What's your view on penalties?
I'll say that again. I missed the first bit. Sorry.
So this is in a more commercial environment for procurement, and where suppliers make promises but they don't deliver or they don't provide the data. Amy's asking what your view is on penalties there.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, we don't have that system ourselves. We don't have any kind of penalty arrangement set in. But what's my view on it? I think we here at East Riding are probably far from being able to do that at the moment. I don't really have an overall view on it. I don't think it's something that we would do initially, but whether further down the line members would want to consider that, it's possible, but it's not something that we do now.
Okay, that's grand. Sorry, my screen is just slowed down. Amy again's got another couple of questions. Can the SV be a two-way process? Example, a supplier can use the system as part of our license agreement. This should help with SME growth and understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a question for you, Rab, actually, because I think
it probably is. So we are extending the functionality to allow your suppliers to enter the results directly. And that's something we could maybe discuss offline, Amy, and I think we might have discussed it, but we can certainly revisit it. One issue sometimes have is ensuring suppliers deliver. Okay, so that's a penalties question we've covered, Stephen. So sorry, I need to move from Q&A.
There's a question in the chat from Gemma Rab around typical response rate to the surveys. So that's a really good question, because obviously not every participant is going to have completed a survey, and depending on what the project is, people are quite reluctant to kind of divulge the journey that they've been on. We tend to ask for a minimum of 10% of a sample survey. Also, depending on what the project is and how many participants are part of the project, surveys might not always be your best method of data collection. So if you wanted to do case studies or, verbal feedback with project workers or things like that, then we would accept that as evidence too. So it's just thinking about your audience really, and are surveys the best method? Sometimes they're not, and just thinking of other ways that you can collect your data. We worked with a project recently with children who were receiving budgeting and things. They had a really handy chart on the wall where they just literally numbered where they were feeling, and then after the session their understanding. So it's just adapting to your participants really, and thinking about how they're going to respond.
That's super. Melanie's asking a few questions about how you find out more and so forth that Sean's responded to. Maybe just to say, I think as Andrea mentioned, what we did a year ago is we set up a new company that's partly owned by the council, called the Social Value Engine Limited. So I'm the growth director for that. Sean works with me, and we've got a number of other people involved as well. So contact us. We've got a website. You can find out more. You can enter a query there. You can respond to the invite we sent you from Madeline. But we'd obviously be happy to talk to you. I think Sean's put the pricing in there as well. Just looking at the other questions. How have I presume VCS voluntary and community sector responded? Have they seen the value in work when looking for further funding? I think the answer is yes. That's on the list.
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, actually. So I think that's one of the areas that actually we've probably seen kind of really good response to their reaction to social value. I think sometimes initially they're a little bit like, oh my word, what am I going to do with this? That seems, it seems like a lot of work. I don't really know what I'm doing. But what we found is when we've spent time, helping them understand what they're doing, helping them collect the information, they've then gone, one of the organisations that we've had based in Gaul, they were able to do a social value analysis that actually they were then able to get a kind of large lottery bid awarded. And a lot of the feedback that they had from the lottery and the lottery themselves at the time said that that was actually one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that they actually was awarded the money, because they were able to sort of articulately show the impact that their organisation was having on the community, which in this case I'm talking about Gaul in East Riding. So, but some of our much smaller organisations, like through the Do It for East Yorkshire Community Fund, we are talking really tiny community groups. They could be, a small number of volunteers, of sort of older people that have got together, and they're just kind of helping their small communities come together and have a cup of tea and a coffee and a bit of food. And their understanding of social value is not like ours. So, being able to articulate to them, in a way that they understand, in a way that they can then collect the information as simple as we can make it, was really important to us. And we've worked really hard, I think, over the years to try and improve that and make it easier. Gosh, as I'm talking, I can see a flurry of questions coming in.
Can I just add briefly to that? I think in other parts of the country, there's a woman, Gemma Finnegan, down in Cornwall, who runs a sort of intermediary, sort of community council type setup. So she supports a vast number of charities using the social value engine, and sometimes that's for funding, sometimes it's for other things. But that goes back to what Sean put into the chat. A council, we see a council or a health trust as a convener within a geographic community. So you can take a bunch of licenses and you can farm them out and move them around amongst your community. We're not going to get, we'll carry on, because I don't think we're in a rush.
We'll do a couple. Yeah, we'll do a couple more.
Okay. So I don't know, Jen, if you've been looking, if there's one you wanted to pick. Or...
Yeah. Georgina's just asked a question around can social value be added at the end of a project, or does it have to be built into the beginning? So she's specifically looking around UK SPF projects that are already being delivered. So ideally, we like to start with a project at the beginning. It's not always an ideal world. Sometimes we are having to look back and evaluate what's already happened. So the thing that I find easiest about the SPF projects with kind of retrospective social value is that they have contracted outcomes and outputs to DLUC that they're having to report on, and a lot of them around improved perception, improved accessibility. We can add social value to that, so there will be social value in there that your organisations will have been collecting, that you can pick social value out of. Obviously, it wouldn't be as much as if you'd been collecting your data from the start in terms of how that's made the person feel, but it's a start. So it is possible. It's not ideal.
I think somebody asked a question about baseline data as well, and I think the UK Shared Prosperity funding is a really good example of where you need your baseline data. And you know, that's something that we've kind of been talking to organizations about, making sure that they know how they're actually starting. So what is the baseline, so that you know what the actual movement is. You know, that's quite important. So that is something that we try to do as much as possible. But like Jen says, sometimes that's an ideal world situation. That would be absolutely perfect. It's not always what we get presented with. So sometimes we're having to, you know, really look at information that some of it's, you know, we're assuming. We don't like necessarily to rely on that, but what we can do is look at other examples of baselines to try and use. We can look at kind of some national data to help us look at some of those baseline data as well, if we don't have it. But the ideal scenario is, yes, we would have the baseline data, and then we would actually then look to see what the movement of the data is. I think do you want to do one more, Rab, before we close, or?
Yeah, I'm just.
Or have we run out of time? Is there too many?
Well, we will come back on these questions. It might just take us a day or two to do that. But there's I saw one here from. If you girls have a look as well and see what you think.
Okay.
Yeah, you picked up the Chris Smith's baseline data. Love the e-learning. We do. There's something about micro businesses in here, about subsidy for micro. What is the subsidy advice about developing micro providers? Does that make
Subsidy
sense?
advice? Oh, okay. Oh, whoever that was, I'm happy to have a conversation with them about the work that we're doing around micro providers, because that probably would take slightly longer than I can answer
Okay, that sounds
now.
like
But yeah, whoever it
that-
is, I'll get in contact
that's
with them. That's
okay.
fine.
That's from Aidan Jackson.
Okay.
And I think any chance of sharing the Excel spreadsheet as a template for the theory of change?
So I think we can share the theory of change in terms of the workbook information. That's something that we share as a tool, if you're an engine user, because it's very much aligns with the work that you do with the social value engine. So that's something you can get hold of at that point.
Okay. And just finally, there's one from Jacqueline Houston, because we haven't shown you anything about the social value engine today. She's asking, presumably the pound value outcomes from the social value engine, when you put in outputs, outcomes, how many outcomes do you need for a project? Oh, I responded to that saying 4 to 8. Am I broadly right?
Yeah, it's a very common question, that, and to be honest, it depends on the size of the project and program and which you're delivering. But yeah, I think probably if you looked at averages, that you're kind of mostly about 6 to 8, I would say. But if it's a large scale program, it can be a lot more than that. So it really depends on whatever it is that you're actually delivering, I would say. But yeah, I think what you said is right there, Rab.
Okay.
Yeah,
and one
the danger isn't with having too many outcomes, is that people kind of get overexcited and end up double counting, because the more outcomes the better, and some of their outcomes might link to a couple of different proxies, so they'll put them all in. So it's just being mindful that we are not overclaiming.
We spot them straight away, don't we, Jen? If anybody tries, we're like, just out.
And actually, we could maybe just finish on that point, because I see people are beginning to drop off. But
yeah,
is a really high social return investment what you should be aiming for?
No, I don't think. I think that's a really good question, and quite a sort of challenging question, I would say. But
that's my aim.
It's a conversation starter, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one that people do get really tied up in knots with. You know, they start to kind of go, oh, the social value for this is higher than that. You know, that it's not necessarily the conversation, unless the project was exactly the same in every single entirety of the project. It's really hard to do a like for like comparison. I think what it does do, though, through the process, is it allows you to really explore exactly what you're delivering. It allows you to really fully understand the impact in which that project or program has had, it also enables you to collect essential data and information through that process. It allows you to have the conversations about what you maybe should do more of and what maybe you should do less of. So there's so much more than that kind of last return that you see at the end, which I know what people go straight to, but yeah, I don't think that should be the full focus of what people look at.
It's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, definitely. I like that, Rob. Yeah, it's the journey and not the destination. I like that. Yes.
So we've lost a bit of our audience. I think we're just about done.
Okay,
As I say, we will come back to it the next few days. Jen and Andrea, thank you so much indeed. Really fascinating discussion. I'm sure everyone, I think we've got them muted so they can't say anything sort of personally to you, but on behalf of the not considerable number of people we had along today, well over 100. Thank you very much indeed. Very much appreciated. So folks, we'll be in touch with the slides. Come back to me and I'll field your questions and hopefully direct them to people who can answer them. Thank you very much for your interest and for coming along. And Maddie, thank you for setting today's event up. Okay.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers, folks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Do you want us just to hang on, Rab?
Yeah, we're tumbling down to 35 people, so people